And now here's part 2 of our episode.
I had forgotten about the fact this was used in Where the Wild Things Are. I was listening to. It's funny because I was, with every episode we do, if it's an album I've heard before, which I was very familiar with this album, I still re-listen to it a lot leading up to it, and I found this is a strange album to listen to at the gym, but it kind of works when you get to certain moments, like when you're using the lat pull down and Wake Up is playing, you're like, yes, I am doing this. I guess since it's been a while since you've discovered this album, how do you listen to this album now? What are the right occasions to listen to Funeral, or has your relationship changed with it? Does it bring up different emotions or memories than it did before?
I would say I also listened to it a bunch leading up to it. I was taking a shower this morning and listening to it, but it's a record that sometimes is too painful to listen to. Mm-hmm. In the sense that I've come a long way since my traumatic childhood and hard teen years and even early 20s. So sometimes I have to be in the right headspace to listen to it and enjoy it. And I will say that over the years, for a while, there was a time where I had to avoid listening to it just because it brought back all these very painful feelings. Not that the album makes me feel pain or sadness. It's just more like that's what I associate it with. But just recently, listening to it this morning in the shower, I'm a lot further along in my healing journey and I'm doing much better. And I could now listen to the music and just enjoy it for what it is.
Yeah, there's something really powerful about being able to be transported, but not, put into a dangerous spot.
Exactly. That's a beautiful way to say it. Exactly that.
Because you have to come to a place with that. There's there was something I read. One of the reviews of the album said that this album succeeded in doing something that a lot of their indie rock contemporaries were not able to achieve, which was some degree of danger. And I don't think now, maybe we've just had Arcade Fire in our lives for long enough that maybe it doesn't feel as dangerous now. But listening to that album, I was like, I could see where there was an element of recklessness, an element of reckless abandon and danger to this album that can be both really exciting, but also can kind of expose you too when you're listening to it.
Yeah, going off of that actually. So I was undiagnosed bipolar as a child and as a teenager and PTSD. So again, I had all these emotions, had no idea how to regulate them, how to feel them. And when I was going through, now I know it's a manic episode, didn't know it back then. It was just more not sleeping, all this energy. I feel like I'm going to explode. My body's vibrating. I would listen to Neighborhood Number 3 over and over again for that buildup and that release, just up and down, up and down. And I genuinely would be in my bedroom with headphones, just dancing in a circle, screaming internally, sometimes externally. So I definitely get that feeling exposed and feeling of danger.
Do you find that this is not the first episode this season where we've discussed mental health specifically and its connection to music, and to reference a couple previous episodes, we talked about The Downward Spiral as being an album that a lot of times people who are in some sort of depressive mental state can identify with what's happening in that album and might choose to listen to it as a way of kind of wallowing in it, as sort of but not in a bad way. Whereas we've also covered the Lizzo album where it's an artist who is all about self-love and pulling yourself out of that, and how that can also be a way that music can kind of help you through things. Where do you stand on that particular spectrum in terms of does it feel like listening to music that speaks to your particular state is more helpful, or do you value music that kind of helps pull you out of it by being from a different mental state?
I would say that I benefit listening to music that I feel is the state I'm in. Exactly like that. I, again, don't really relate to music lyrically. I mean, of course, there are some lyrics that I do, but it's again all about the musicality and the build up and the beats and the tempo, because I feel things very physically.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I listen to music, it's really, so for example, another album that I suggested to you guys, Turn on the Bright Lights by Interpol.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That song, I think, is a mental breakdown in musical form.
Mm.
And it has its highs and its lows, and that is my favorite record of all time. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that as I talk about Funeral.
You are allowed to say that, yes.
Yeah.
But so I listen to music that lets me sit with my feelings and the sensations in my body, because ignoring them doesn't work, doesn't help me.
Yeah, I have a friend who's really into jazz, and he said, he's my go-to guy for jazz. And I was asking him for recommendations one time, and he goes, well, like, how are you feeling? What do you want? What kind of record do you want? And I go, I don't know. I've been feeling kind of anxious lately. So I think I just want something to speak to that. And he goes, well, do you want to double down on it, or do you want something that's going to soothe that? And I was like, okay, yeah, that, thinking about it in that way, I like what you're saying about identification with it, because something that you can tell you that you're not crazy, something that and a piece of art that can tell you that you're not, not to say that you're not unique, but to say that there's somebody out there that is feeling the same thing or can commiserate. To me, it feels like there's always going to be value to that. And then you can also find the stuff that is going to be proactively like saying, well, what are you going to do about that? That seems like just another step, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I feel like that's pop music for me.
Yeah. And we need pop music. I think for a long time, I looked down my nose at a lot of pop music for a long time, but now I'm like, geez, there's totally a use for it. Listening to that Lizzo album, I was like, we need Lizzo.
Absolutely.
We don't deserve Lizzo as a people, but we need her for sure.
I agree.
Before we get into your standards for picking this album, I just have this question that I want to ask, because I don't know how to answer this. I know that their third album, called The Suburbs, which won them the Grammy Award for Best Album, or Album of the Year, whatever it's called, whatever Grammys. What is it about that album and this album and Funeral that makes them? This album, their music sounds to me like the suburbs, like growing up in the suburbs. Is this unique to me, or is there something about it that objectively they are writing music that describes the suburban existence?
Yeah, what is it? When The Suburbs came out, there was that that marketing website where you put in your address. Do you remember this?
I don't.
You put in your address, and then what it would do is it would basically take the Google Street View, and it would play the song. It would play, I think it was the song "The Suburbs." This might exist out there still, and if it is, we'll put it in the episode bio. But it takes the Google Street View of your neighborhood and then kind of swoops you through it like you're flying through it, and has the music playing behind it. And I remember it was 2010 when that album came out, and I remember thinking, damn, that is like a brilliant incorporation of this technology that we have at our use. Now I'm like, are they who has that info? Who has my address out there? Does Win Butler have my address in his Rolodex or something?
That's awesome. I had no idea that was a thing. But I mean, I remember like the little movie they had with the album.
Yeah.
That was really cool. Yeah. So to go back to your question.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Ask it one more time. I'm trying to.
Why does this music sound like the soundtrack to The Suburbs? Like, what is it about this?
I don't know. They're just very good at capturing like the beauty and the mundane and childhood innocence, and those are universal feelings, and I'm not sure exactly how they do it though. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
As I'm sitting here, I'm thinking maybe it's the epicness. Actually, maybe there's something about how we've been listening. Michael and I have been listening to this podcast called Dissect. I don't know if you've listened to that one, Sam, but it's this guy, a very monotone academic guy, dissects different albums, and he was talking about Frisian, right? Isn't that what it was called, Michael? The feeling of goosebumps you get when you hear.
Yeah, I think that's the word.
Yeah, Frisian or Frisson or whatever it is. People sound off in the chat that we don't have to tell me that I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. But basically, the effect of the music going in two different directions, going like up and down, so like higher, and then also the bass coming in at the same time, and that being the thing in music that gives us that goosebumps feeling, which I experience all the time. But I think that there might be a thematic thing happening with their music where they're taking the mundane, the mundanity of the suburbs and the kind of the sameness of it, but then putting on top of it this epic adventure, sort of huge sprawling epicness to it. That is what we all feel in this, or at least that's what I felt in the suburbs. I was like, there's something happening here. There's some kind of epicness happening underneath all this stuff that seems the same, this stuff that seems boring. But there have to be people out here in these neighborhoods that are feeling the same way as me, that want that grand adventure to their life. Maybe there's something to it that's that.
I really like that. I think for me, more so, I was living in this small college town, and the music to me felt more that sort of hope you have as a kid, where you're like, I have my whole life ahead of me. This is not the end. I have the adventure waiting for me. It was more like bubbling underneath the surface, like you said, but it was more like it's going to come out eventually. It's going to come. And I think also with their music, going back, like circling all the way back to how you can feel danger and excitement with it. It's just, I think they have a really good balance of darkness and light, and you can't have one without the other. And I feel like that's very prominent in their music and the feelings that music evokes. So.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
I'd be really curious to hear from people who grew up in cities if they would feel the same way about this album.
Yeah, right?
Like, is it just my bias because of the fact that I'm like, I grew up in the suburbs and so it feels like it's speaking to me? Like, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Where did you grow up, if you don't mind me asking?
Syracuse, New York.
Oh, okay. Cool.
So decidedly suburbs.
Yeah.
I know it's a city, but it's not really a city.
Mine was very Midwestern. I was born in St. Louis, and then lived in LA, lived in the Valley for 7 years in Calabasas. So that was the suburbs in its own way, but a very different kind of suburbs. Back then it was like Jessica Simpson and Nick Lachey lived there. The newlyweds.
I was going to say, aren't the Kardashians there?
That's where this was pre-Kardashian too. But, so then we moved back to St. Louis. And so I got this I'm very grateful that I got that Midwest and West Coast childhood, because I kind of got, it exposed me to a lot of things I feel like I never would have if I didn't get both of those things. I'm a lucky guy.
But that's cool.
I'm suburbs through and through, though. That's for sure.
I never even considered, I was born in LA, and when I was 10, my family moved us to this town, Corvallis, Oregon, where the university is at, small college town. And I never really considered it the suburbs until years later, because I don't know. I grew up resenting Corvallis because I was like, I'm an LA girl. But now I completely identify as an Oregonian, and I don't tell people I'm from California.
Right. What must it be like to the idea of growing up in Chicago or New York or like actually in the city of LA is absolutely, like, I don't even know how it would work. I know I've met people who've done it, but it seems so foreign to me, the whole idea.
Yeah. Looking back, I love that I grew up in Corvallis. It was small, safe. There was nature everywhere. We would have mountain parties. So yeah, it was a great time.
Well, you had to give us a list of albums. We asked you to provide us albums you considered to be perfect, and we didn't really define that for you. We sort of left that up to you. So when you were compiling your list, and specifically including this album on that list, what were your standards for choosing a perfect album? What things did you consider?
I guess when I was choosing the albums, I had a mix of two categories, ones that I thought were musically great and perfect by criticism standards. And then I had the ones that were perfect to me. And that is basically based on the emotions that they make me feel. Yeah. It's as simple as that. An album that I can listen to from start to finish, because as I mentioned, I'm more of a playlist person, but there are very few albums that I can listen to through and through. and Arcade Fire's Funeral is one of a handful.
Yeah.
And I chose this one well, you guys chose this one. But
you
this one was,
included it on your list, yeah.
Yes, but I was going to say, but I included it on my list. I chose Arcade Fire's Funeral because it was the first album that really made me realize that I love music, and I can listen to music and feel things, and I can listen to music and feel less alone with my feelings. So from that album, I discovered so many more that I can listen to through and through. But I think this was the first one that I really discovered and thought to myself, I really, really love music.
Did this album, because you said there were sort of a couple that you felt like objectively perfect albums, and then the rest were sort of personal. Did this, which one did this album sit on, or did it sit on both?
Both. I was about to say that. Both.
There you go. Yeah. So when you listen to it now, is it like, we talked a little bit about how for a while it was a little too overwhelming to listen to it. So when you do encounter this album, or when you choose to listen to this album now, do you tend to listen to it through and through, or is it that you included a lot in your playlists, or is it both?
This album is definitely one that I need to listen to from start to finish. I feel like you need to get the whole experience. I mean, obviously, like, again, Neighborhood 1 through 4. Yeah. You can't really, I mean, sure, I have Wake Up on every indie summer playlist I have.
It's gotta be.
Yeah, exactly. But no, definitely this is an album that if I'm going to listen to it, I'm going to listen to it.
Yeah. Yeah. It does work. It moves really quick, too, is the other thing that I will say. Like, it's just so propulsive that when I found myself listening to it in preparation for this recording, I was like, man, it's over before I even feel like I've gotten into it a lot of the time. And then I think also the fact that there is a pretty clear section, like there's a pretty clear first half and second half thematically to me. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you would agree with that or not.
I would say, yeah, there's a change right after Wake Up, actually.
Yes. Yeah.
Because you have this build-up. You have this build-up towards Wake Up, and then that second half of the song, you have this sort of release, and then the rest of the album is much more, like, coming down.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. They're twee and jangly, but I think they're proud of being twee and jangly. Like, it doesn't seem to be something a characterization that they really want to move away from.
Absolutely. They embrace that. And like you said, they sort of started that.
Right. You don't have the Lumineers without Arcade Fire, unfortunately.
Definitely.
That's totally the band I was thinking of, because there is sort of, it feels like almost every Arcade, especially on Funeral, I would say half the songs on Funeral are begging for the audience to join along, like, and sing along with them at some point. Like, there's always some sort of, whether it's a call and response or like a, everyone yell at this point or something like that. Mm-hmm.
See, the band that came to my mind was Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros, which I would consider a Arcade Fire light, or maybe off-brand Arcade Fire.
I agree. I think I'd agree with that. I think a song we haven't talked about actually was Une année sans lumière, which I think is a beautiful song and probably an underrated song on this album. And the friend, you get I think Regine's presence in this, and maybe not everybody loves her presence, but I think her presence really tempers a lot of what's going on with Win. Like, I think they're just a really great duo, and the rest of, I think her songs on this album might be the best Regine songs from their whole body of work. Like, that song, In the Backseat and Haiti, I think those are really, really strong songs.
Yeah, I was going to ask, who doesn't like her presence on this album?
Oh, I don't know. I'm just saying. I'm not making any accusations.
But I agree with those songs. And then I would say Sprawl number 2, is that what it's called, on the Suburbs, where she's...
Yeah. Oh, Mountains Beyond Mountains, yeah.
Mountains Beyond Mountains. I would say that's also one of her best songs.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say, on the new album, I'm not a huge fan of the race and religion songs. Want to put that out there. I don't know how you feel about that, Sam, but on the most recent album, the song, I forgot I know the parenthetical is race and religion, but when I listen to that song, it feels a little cringe to me, maybe.
I'm going to just confess that I've listened to the album a few times, but I'm still not I haven't hit that point where I would say I'm familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say there are some songs that I do sort of cringe at. I can't tell you what track it is, but there are definitely songs that I just think this is a little too dramatic, Arcade Fire.
Yeah. Are there any skips on Funeral for you? I mean, I feel like your answer is probably no. Not to, not to make this up. Fair enough. Yeah, that's a question we've been asking a lot of. It's come up a lot when we talk about perfection in an album, and I even for me, even my favorite albums, as I listen to them over the years, there's not going to be there's sometimes like a song that I will skip over, even on my most favorite albums, like in Rainbows or something like that. There's a song or two that I might not listen to in full, but I feel like it really comes down to when you're going to listen to the album from front to back, are there any skips? And most of the time people say no. I think this one holds true to that as well.
Absolutely. Like I said, I feel like if I'm going to listen to it, I have to listen to all of it because it's an experience for me.
Well, I guess before we go back to the scoreboard and fully evaluate your case, is there anything we haven't said about this album or anything we haven't asked you about that you want the listeners to know about Funeral?
What have we missed? We have to have missed something.
I don't know. I feel like I could talk about the feelings I have for this album forever. So I honestly can't think of anything right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're also gonna listeners, just so you're aware, we're gonna provide a link in the episode description. Sam has already written about this album specifically, and so we're gonna provide a link to. It was for the 15
anniversary, Funeral.
Yeah, so we'll provide a link to that in case you want to read more about what Sam has to say about this album in great detail. A very well written article. Enjoyed it quite a bit.
Thank you.
Yeah, me too.
I was gonna say, definitely read that because I feel on my feet I kind of bumble when I speak. So
we all do. That's the fun of it. But I think you make you characterize it in a really beautiful way when you say that it is still, after all these years, a voice of reason for our generation. Because I hadn't thought about it in that way before reading your piece, and I think it is that. I like that you call it a voice of reason because it makes it feel like it's inviting people in. It's inviting understanding, which I think at their best, Arcade Fire does really well.
That is beautiful, Tyler.
Well, thanks for writing that article, and everybody, I hope you really enjoy that. But let's see since this is about winning, since this is about competition,
everything's about winning,
and things being good or bad.
The life is a competition. It's okay.
Exactly. Capitalism has taught us. If capitalism has taught us nothing, it's taught us that. Let's see how you did. You got some good. We recapped your points from the first half, but I'll give you the points that you had for the second half. I give you 400 points for talking about this album as a voice of reason, because that really, really is how it exists for me nowadays too. I gave you 200 points for saying that it made you feel when you were listening to this album, living in the suburbs, like you had your whole life ahead of you, and how there was a hope that could be shared by people who lived in those kind of areas. Really loved that. And then there was, I gave you 100 more points for that idea, the notion of feeling identified with music in the particular state that you are in, and not necessarily saying that it has to move you out of that particular emotional state or into a different emotional state, just that it sees you where you are. That idea of feeling known and seen. Gave you 100 points for that. So you did pretty damn well on this point total. I think your argument was built strongly on a very strong foundation. Michael, with all the points on the board, with the beautiful stories that Sam has shared with us, the beautiful emotional history that she shares with this album and still experiences to this day when she listens to it, what do you think? Does Funeral by Arcade Fire, 2004, go to 11? Is it a perfect album?
I do believe that it is. Although, I'm always a sucker for someone who makes a super personal connection to an album. But I mean, that's what this podcast is all about. Sharing the story that makes music meaningful to you, because, one person's Radiohead is another person's Nickelback. That's all I'm going to say.
You're not wrong.
There you go.
Well, yay! I'm so glad.
Yeah, and then didn't I see in the updated Rolling Stone best top 500 albums of all time that this was number 500. This was on the list. That's a pretty,
Yeah, I did see that too.
Hey, for as listicles go, that's a good listicle to be on, if you ask
Yes,
me.
absolutely.
Well, then I guess we just need to introduce what our standout track was from this album. And since you chose "Wake Up," we were left with a great option to choose for our standout track, especially since it'll be the last standout track of this season. I can't think of a better song to play out on. Michael, what did we choose?
Well, we chose what I think is a great song of sort of bittersweet joy and also celebration and also anger. There's like a lot of emotions going on in this song, but it just feels like such a fitting end to our season. We picked the song "Rebellion" (parentheses lies close parentheses),
Yes,
which feels like it should be the end of the album, and then they stick on "In the Backseat" as like a little sneak attack at the end, which also feels like a great end to the album. So it feels like you get two fantastic album enders for the price of one with this album. Any thoughts about "Rebellion" lies, Sam?
Oh,
if you want.
I think that's a great. I mean, that was the song that I was going to choose initially. Basically, for all the reasons you said, I would still argue that it's probably Arcade Fire's best song. For the exact reasons that you said. I don't want to repeat them, but like I said, "Wake Up" is probably the most popular song.
Yeah.
Their best song ever, like across all albums, you would say?
I really would. Yes, I think that it's like a quintessential Arcade Fire song. I feel like when you listen to this song, you're getting all the emotions and you're getting all the musicality to it. I think you're getting what the core of Arcade Fire is in Rebellion Lies.
Totally.
And that poor keyboard player who's just playing that same chord over and over and over again for the entire song. That's all I can think about. If I were in a band and I were playing keyboard, I'd people like, yes, I have a Rebellion Lies. And I'd be like, oh my God, my left hand is going to hurt so much after this.
Yeah, that's something I didn't think about.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for doing this, Sam. This has been a real treat, and we're happy to call you a friend of the pod. Hope to have you back on someday very soon.
I would love that. Thank you guys so much for inviting me.
You're the best.
Sure. And to all our listeners out there, thanks so much for joining us this season, our second full season. Anything else you want to say to our listeners, Tyler, before we close out with a song?
Oh, not to be too sappy, but this has been a real joy to do for all of you. I don't want to speak for Michael as well, and who knows who's listening, but music is a salve. Music gives you life. Music brings people together, and I love Michael. And I love all the people that we've talked to, and it's really inspiring to do this. So if you're out there listening, thank you, and we can't wait to make more for you.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. I will echo everything that Tyler said. I do love this pod. I love you, Tyler, and
love you, buddy. We'll
see y'all in the fall some point. We're working on our calendars. We'll figure it out.
We'll see you soon.
But for now, let's enjoy a little Arcade Fire.